Welcome to the Impact of Educational Leadership Talk Show podcast, hosted by ID3 and Professor Jeff Willie. This show is designed to provide an exclusive forum on educational achievement gaps related to learner success while discovering relationships and family issues in diverse settings.
Welcome back to another night of the Impact of Educational Leadership. This is episode 19. I'm your host, ID3, along with Professor Jeff Willie. Tonight's panelists are Rick Beaule and Delna, Bryan. Please say hello to the people.
Hello, one and all. This is Delna, Bryan.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Rick Beaule here.
Hi, everyone. Jeff Willie. Thankful to be part of this discussion tonight.
All right. Well, tonight's discussion is the changing roles of education and fighting for teachers. Educators have to reinvent their roles to become equally co-learners and collaborators. Educators have always been the biggest influencers in a student's life. Like all other industries, the education sector is going through huge transformations, largely because of the digital age with digital technology. Digital technology has changed the way the world works and is changing the way children study. Teaching at its core is a moral profession. What happens in teachers' preparation? The early years of teaching, and for teachers throughout their career. And better yet, how can a teacher's moral purpose be protected? Those with a clear sense of moral purpose often become disheartened. Those with a limited sense of purpose are never called upon to demonstrate their commitment, which will eventually lead to burnout. So tonight we will be discussing the changing roles of education and fighting for teachers. First, I want to pull from Mr. Rick Beaule. Mr. Rick Beaule started his 17th year in public education and holds a Bachelor's of Science in Music Education from Indiana University of Pennsylvania and a Master of Science degree in Educational Administration and Leadership from Duquesne. He also serves as president of the Texas State Teachers Association's Region 10, TSTA's largest member region, representing over 3,600 members, which surrounds Austin and stretches from north of Waco south to San Morocco, as one of 15 members from across the state of Texas to participate in the NEA's Educator Voice Academies next month. Mr. Rick Beaule, please say hello to the people.
Hello again. It's a pleasure to be here tonight.
Absolutely. So my question for you tonight is, describe some challenges that educators are facing today in changing roles of education.
Well, first of all, again, thanks for having me on. And I would say that right now, student-led or student-centered collaborative learning is really the favorite trend in the highest-ranked educational systems in the world right now. But there are several barriers for American and especially Texan public educators that make it harder for that collaborative learning environment to be created. And not surprisingly, that first barrier is the STAR test. It is, for worse or more worse, because it's surely not better by any stretch, not based on any sort of collaborative learning. It's based on individualized learning, driving individualized results that are then aggregated together with enough pressure applied to districts as to actually end up discouraging the use of collaborative learning in our schools. And what does that mean? It means that our teachers are literally flooded with data on all of their students with the idea and goal that somehow we can work with each one to get them to pass or get above that Mendoza line, if you'll allow me to use that baseball term. We are required to create student learning objectives and rate each student's level of mastery and progress throughout the year. And that's what our primary form of accountability is based on. Now, they're very careful to not actually say to only deal with the STAR testing, but they'll say that you can go beyond, but the only true and meaningful form of accountability is that test. And heaven help you if the expected percentage of your kids don't pass it. Now, the second obstacle is money. And after that amazing conversation that you, ID3, and Professor Willie and I had a couple weeks ago, I did some research, and I found some pretty shocking stats. In 2018, of Texas's 254 counties, 213 of them had more than half of their student populations that were eligible for free or reduced lunch, based on federal guidelines. That's over 80% of the counties in Texas. So in more than 4 out of 5 Texas counties, over half of the students probably aren't able to afford the private tutoring after school or on weekends, where that collaborative learning is more likely to take place. And that means that those students who would benefit most from that collaborative learning, who are also much more likely to be rural students and much more likely to be at a higher risk factor academically, are much less likely to qualify for those early college high schools, dual enrollment, and international baccalaureate programs and things like that. And that's a major problem. So one real way to solve it would be to find a way to deliberately structure the school day itself away from the STAR-driven data mania, to prioritize the collaborative learning that best practice indicates that our educators and students profit most from. So by doing this, we also steer away from some of the major drawbacks that some of those super education-focused countries run into, and that would be difficulties in creating well-rounded adults through a lack of extracurricular activities that help bring a broad array of life experiences that all the true leaders in our history always seem to have. And we just can't ever forget that play is itself collaborative learning, and it's a vital part of child development. So the other challenge is really getting people to realize that investing in education and those who are called to teach the future is not a waste of taxpayer money, whose employees are never to be trusted and suspiciously watched at every turn. And I understand that Texas was the birthplace of No Child Left Behind, but it can also be the birthplace to truly create the modern educational system that we need, right? And to do that, we need to invest in the training and support of not only our future crop of educators, but also our current teachers and administrators, because they will need training on creating and implementing new systems so that they can achieve that goal of collaborative learning. Early college, high school, dual enrollment, and IB teachers, as well as teachers in rural areas that are trained to teach these courses, also deserve the investment in being appropriately compensated for that extra work that they're taking on to give students in those schools the opportunities that their urban and suburban brethren already have because they're located by those community colleges. You know, that's only a partial list, but there are two of the big ones that we really need to think about and barriers that we need to overcome if we're going to really best service our students for the future.
I absolutely agree with that. There are so many barriers, especially now that we have this huge new school finance bill that just took effect. Well, it's in effect as we speak, as a matter of fact. And I know they're adding things in and they're making steps toward providing aid for hunger and malnutrition, homelessness even, and inadequate health care. That is plaguing more than, I believe, half of all Texans as it relates to public school students, and that interferes with their ability to learn. That kind of brings me to my next point or my next question for the Honorable Delna Bryan. So, Delna Bryan, how are you doing?
I'm doing just fine, and you?
Wonderful, wonderful. So let me tell you a little bit about Delna. Delna Bryan is an American educator, an orator, aspiring author, and advisor to educators around the world. Bryan is a dominant leader in the African American and Hispanic community. Bryan is a native of the Republic of Panama. She is a key proponent and member of the Delta Kappa Gamma International, where she held both local office and state committees. After some time, she became the director of the Panamanian North American Cultural Center. She has earned 2 master's one from the University of Southern Mississippi in Harrisburg, Mississippi, in administration, and another from the University of Granada, Spain, in teaching the Spanish language and culture. She is currently teaching Spanish, AP Spanish, at Young Men's Leadership Academy in Pleasant Grove, Texas. Delna, my question for you is, how can the education system better prepare educators and students through these education reforms?
First of all, the word reform, I think, is thrown around very loosely, because we have had reform since Horace Mann. But now we are not using the word correctly. I see it more as micromanaging the teachers. And when you micromanage a teacher, you are putting a lock on that teacher's creativity. They cannot teach and they cannot expound on what they need to grow that student. That is so crucial in this 21st century and beyond. We know that they belong in this world that is going to be super competitive, yet we are so driven with testing. That's one of the problems. Mr. Beaule mentioned the STAR test. My school is almost 90% Hispanic. We also have to deal with TELPAS. We have to deal with Woodcock Munoz. We have other tests that our limited language learners must take. And they're so test-driven that we are no longer growing our teachers to improve their teaching techniques, that they can grow the students that we need. We're faced with a myriad of problems. It was mentioned, more students living in poverty. We have problems with immigration. We have problems with gun violence. We have problems with teen pregnancy. Yet we are not really focusing on this relationship that we need. That's another term that they use quite loosely. We must build relationships with our students. Yes, but do they give us the time to build this relationship with these students? Or are they still focused on micromanaging and pretending that it's for our good, what they're doing? I remember reading what Nelson Mandela had to say some years ago, that education is the most powerful weapon that you can use to change the world. If we're going to change anything in this United States, we need to start with how we educate our students here in Texas. Thank you.
That was absolutely amazing, and I kind of want to tie in with what Mr. Beaule said and what you said, Delna, and maybe you guys can kind of talk about that briefly as well. But some of the challenges that we are seeing and are facing with policy groups that are focusing or prioritizing privatization or private schools or private education over public education. If we were to have a quick think tank, the think tank I'm asking about is, what are the barriers or the challenges that privatization is causing on public schools as it relates to education, as it relates to government funding, and how can public schools then keep a steady ground, a firm stance on educating our students and keeping the retention and attrition of our student body intact.
Welcome to the Impact of Educational Leadership Talk Show podcast, hosted by ID3 and Professor Jeff Willie.
Well, I think there's a couple.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Absolutely, Ms. Delna.
Excuse me, when you talk about privatization, I think the word that we, again, don't pay attention to is charter schools. And people have gone to sleep and are not aware of the harm that charter schools have done for public education. They have a marketing skill that is phenomenal. It is one of the best marketing structures I have seen. Yet our public schools have wonderful, wonderful choice schools. But do we market our programs? Do we market our magnet schools that put out outstanding students? Do we market our baccalaureate, international baccalaureate schools? Do we market our Montessori schools? Do we market our all-girls schools, like the Irma Rangel here in Dallas, or our Barack Obama here in Dallas? That is what is beating us when it comes to charter schools or privatization. They know how to market what they have because, one, they have the monies. The money's there behind them, so they can say whatever they need to say, but at the same time, they do not tell the truth because they do not accept all students. They don't accept my child if my child is dyslexic. They don't accept my child if my child has any learning disabilities. They don't accept my child. Yet a public school must accept all students. So we have to know how to level that playing field between charter schools and public schools and get the public schools to be able to market themselves the right way. We have the best of the best. Okay, let's prove that. Rick, what you were going to say?
I would very much tie in with what Ms. Delna is saying. If you recall, a couple of weeks ago, I spoke of the stool in which a proper public school educational system is supported with the parents, with the schools, and with the community, right? And what charter schools do and what private schools do is really attempt to kick one of the legs out from that stool. And that is the educator portion of this, right? And they hide all of that under that mantle of taxpayer accountability. And that is the system and the lens by which they focus their message, and they get people to distrust that educators are able to do the job. And that is why you see the curriculums that you see where everything is spelled out, and you see that lack of training that Delna is speaking of. And I think that when you break that down, you, number one, have to show the data that shows that the charter schools are not holding up the bargain that they said they could hold up, because they're really not. You know, there are a few charter schools that are functioning very well. There are a lot of charter schools that are functioning no better than public schools when you look at them. Maybe they might be better in math, but they're weaker in other areas, or they might be better in some other areas, but weaker in math. So understanding that data, and there is a huge amount of data now that clearly shows that, is part of that. So you're undermining the invincibility part that they're showing, whether they come in and, well, we can do this, right? Number three is taking that marketing that Delna was talking about and in getting people to understand that an investment in public schools is still the best way to go. We take all comers, right? As Delna pointed out, right? We do it all. We take them no matter what, and we do so, and we do miracles when we do so. And we get these kids ready to learn in spite of the barriers that get tossed in front of us. So getting people to understand that the investment in public schools is a worthwhile investment and what they're getting for their money, as opposed to what they're not getting for their money with the charter schools and the for-profit schools. Remember, anytime you have something that is for-profit, the first thing that they are going to work to protect is their profit, because that is the reason for their existence. Public schools do not exist for financial profit. They exist for the profit of the growing of young minds and of our future. And that is truly the investment that pays off best in the long term. And getting people to understand that and realize that is really, I think, an important role in getting people to understand that, the privatization is not the panacea that they said it is. Public schools are the ones that still, in the end, are going to provide the education. They are the educational backbone of this country. They have been, and they will continue to be.
Welcome to the Impact of Educational Leadership Talk Show podcast, hosted by ID3 and Professor Jeff Willie. This show is designed to provide an exclusive forum on educational achievement gaps related to learner success while discovering relationships and family issues in diverse settings.
You just answered the why. You just answered the why to this whole conversation. And I'm about to bring Professor Willie in here. I'm about to bring Professor Willie here if he gives me an opportunity to do that. So, Professor Willie, I want to pull on him to kind of synthesize this discussion so far. And so, Professor Willie, let's kind of talk about some ways educators can sustain or achieve keeping a moral purpose as a teacher with all of this stuff going on, all of this noise going on, all of this distraction going on, all of this chaos going on, all this competition going on with charter schools, as Delna mentioned, and with private schools, and still maintain their ground and still maintain their character and moral purpose as a teacher.
Wow. What's been said by Rick and Delna is absolutely amazing. And I like the way you summed it up, Isaiah. Lots of noise, lots of distractions, lots of moving parts that's impacting the morale and the health of our educators, our teachers, and our administrators in the public system that, as Rick stated, are taking all comers. They are not for profit, but yet they're taking all comers, and they're turning, as we say, someone else's garbage, if you want to look at it that perspective, and they're making diamonds out of it. And folks are walking in the door, are ill-prepared, and walking out of the door, and they're well-prepared to take on the world and pursue those careers. What Delna said was absolutely amazing, and I want to start based on what she said in regards to building those relationships. And it's going to go into more lead into another proportion of that. But the key component of that learning environment is a lot of teachers' hands are tied because of the testing that Rick and Delna so eloquently phrased, is that because they don't have time to build those relationships. No learning takes place from any situation unless there is a level of relationship. And teachers have to build a relationship with their students, because teachers, in other words, students do not learn from anyone or any teacher unless they like that teacher. And that teacher must be focused on that relationship as to why they became an educator. If they don't understand, why did you choose to become an educator? That's the purpose of most teachers and most educators going in this profession. We don't go in this profession to get wealthy or to get rich. We go in this profession because we want to have an impact and be a change agent in our society. And I'm hoping that's primarily the reason that most educators are doing what they do. They have a passion for students. They value students' lives. They want to be change agents. They want to make a difference. And that got to be the most important thing that they do every day, is to be a change agent for people's lives. I like to say this: educators should be teaching with passion, but managing with compassion. That means that they are building those relationships with those students. They are being positive at all times, and they have to see themselves as being positive, because you can't give what you don't have. If you're not positive as an educator, you can't pass on positivity to your students. So you must remain positive at all costs, because that positivity is going to change that student's life, especially when that student is coming in from a negative environment and they see that educator as a means of positive change for their life. And part of being positive, sometimes we get frustrated and we get upset. But we know that a soft answer would turn away wrath. So that educator must always speak in a soft tone, because tone makes a significant difference. And that body language makes a significant difference. That goes into the why. And you look back at that Meridian study done by Dr. Meridian at UCLA, only 7% of what I say are the words, but most of what I say is 55% from my body language, and 38% is coming from the tone. And you and I can say the same thing, but that 55% and that 38% sends that true message. And so you have to be careful on that tone, goes into that why. I tell my educators and all my teachers and all my administrators, have high expectations for all your students, because all students can achieve. And even though you might doubt and some may not achieve, but a student should never know that you do not like them and you do not have low expectations of them. You must have high expectations of all students. And one of the key components of that is being able to listen to your students, because they'll tell you what's going on in their lives. And I tell my educators, seek first to understand, and then you will be understood. That comes from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People from Stephen Covey. But seek first to understand. Listen with your heart, not with your ear. And students will tell you what they are doing, what's going on. And most importantly, every child needs a champion. If any of you have ever seen Rita Pearson, I've heard of Dr. Rita Pearson as a phenomenal educator. She passed away a few years ago, but she did a TED Talk on high expectations and knowing how every child needs a champion. They coming from all these diverse backgrounds that Rita and Rick talked about, social economic challenge background, teen pregnancy, gun violence, gang violence, but every child needs a champion. They must have a champion. If you don't speak for that and advocate for that child, then ask yourself why. Why are you in this profession? You're in this profession because you want to make a difference. You're a difference maker. You want to be part of a difference, be part of the change. As Elna so eloquently put, which is one of my favorite quotes, Delna, I'm going to close with this because you said it so well, and I want to pull it up, but it talks about Nelson Mandela's quote in regards to being a champion, in regards to being education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And if you look at all my emails, that's the quote I have at the bottom of all my email transaction.
Wow, amazing. You know, as I was listening to that, I was in awe, and to me it kind of led me to the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter tonight is what are some ways to protect a teacher's moral purpose? Who wants to go first?
I will. But if Professor Willie, you want to tag on, go ahead.
I was going to say that, and some of you may have heard this before, and I'm talking to campus leaders when I say this, and I'm talking to district administrators, and I'm talking to school board, because it's that teacher is in that classroom is making a difference in that child's life. And I tell those decision makers, if you don't feed the teachers, they will eat the kids. What am I saying? If you don't give them the resources that they need to be creative and productive and time to build a relationship, the impact of that and the significant, and the person that's going to suffer the most is the child. If you don't feed the kids, teachers will eat the kids. If you don't feed the teachers, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. If you don't feed the teachers, they will eat the kids because they're humans. And if they're not being resourced and well taken care of, we will always respond. And the least resistant target is the child. And we take it out on the children.
Welcome to the Impact of Educational Leadership Talk Show podcast, hosted by ID3 and Professor Jeff Willie.
That's well put, sir. I think that it really ties into, right, the moral question is tied into the long-term attack that has happened through private and charter schools that Delna alluded to. And I think that, and I'll paraphrase one of my favorite authors, is David Weber, and is talking about his belief that the sentence, the end justifies the means, where suppression and repression become somehow acceptable if it's done in the name of a cause, or belief that reduces individuals to expendable pawns is the vilest of human poisons. And I think when you look at how charter schools have not only presented themselves, but have portrayed public education is a long-term burden that teachers have attempted to shoulder and carry. And it has only been in the last few years with the Red for Ed movement that public educators, who are by their natures accepting souls, as we said, we take all comers, and we shoulder burdens that most other folks would not be willing to take. We have tried to take that burden and say, well, we're going to do our jobs anyway. And finally, in the last few years, we have said, no, this is not right. Enough is enough. And I think for teachers to maintain that moral imperative that they have, that what they do, as Professor Willie said so aptly, makes a difference, right? We make a difference every day in the lives of our children. And anything that stands in our way of that should be confronted and dealt with. And I think even just having that respect that, this is my child's teacher, is important, and that provides that impetus for those teachers. I had a small child in the supermarket the other day who was with his mom, and I said, how you doing? And he's one of my students, and the student says, that's my music teacher. And he smiled, big smile, and it made me feel good, which brings me to the other part, and that is that teachers need to make sure that we manage self-care and self-awareness, making sure that we find ways to fill that emotional bucket, to remind ourselves of why we do what we do. For me, I got into teaching because I loved the feeling that I got when a child walked out of a room, even in high school when I was helping out my classmates. I loved that they got excited when they walked out of a room with a piece of knowledge they didn't have when they walked in, and I was able to give it to them. Right? So we need to make sure that we cherish and acknowledge and trumpet and celebrate those moments that we have with each other. Mm-hmm. And I think the final component of that, once you take care of making sure that your perception in the minds of the community remains unsullied, and making sure that you are filling that emotional bucket and keeping that emotional bank account from being overdrawn, is to make sure that you maintain your awareness of what the big picture is. We did what we did through Red for Ed here in Texas because we gained that awareness and we were willing to use it. And we must never let that go or we will slide back. So it is important and an imperative for us, I think, for us to keep going, to keep educating the public and making sure that they understand that education is worth the investment, that it is worth the time, and that the teachers who are part of the communities that they're in are worth being supported so that they can focus on their kids, have the autonomy in their classroom, and be able to build those relationships with those kids to get the results that everybody wants.
Okay, I agree with you wholeheartedly. The thing that I would like to add and close with is what you felt as a young teacher going into that classroom. You talked about seeing the light bulb going on in that child's face, them walking out with more than they walked into your class. Don't lose focus of that. It is crucial that you nourish your soul. It is crucial that you go back to school. You're not going to go to a doctor who graduated and has not been to take any courses in 10 years. You are not going to go to any professional in any other system if that person is not keeping current. Oh yes, we play that we have professional development in our districts, but sometimes that professional development is not enough. So another way that I would encourage you to keep your moral focus, join different organizations. For Spanish, we have the American Association of Teachers of Spanish and Portuguese. We network. We have the American Council of Teachers of Foreign Language. We have the Texas Foreign Language Association. Join different organizations. We have Phi Delta Kappa, you name it. We have groups that we can meet with to nourish our souls and keep us current in order for us to create what we need daily in that classroom. That will always help a lot.
Tonight has been legendary. If you're just joining in or just tuning in to this podcast, the core of this discussion is the changing roles of education and fighting for teachers. Well, we are out of time. And with that being said, let's do a quick takeaway from each panelist. And Professor Willie, who wants to go first?
Yes. I would like to go first. I want Ms. Delna to close us out because of her so eloquent. And just listening to her just really has made my evening. But we both all know no significant learning takes place without that relationship. And we must continue to advocate for our teachers. And teachers need to replenish, renew, and refresh and know why they chose this profession.
I would like to echo all of my other panelists. Thank you again for allowing me to come on. Making sure that we have our school day restructured to support collaborative learning, that we support our teachers in the work that they do and educate the public in terms of build those relationships. You know, as Maya Angelou put it, they won't necessarily remember what you told them. They won't necessarily remember what you did, but they will remember how you made them feel. And I think making sure that we all understand that we're in this together and supporting each other will be a big key.
And I would say, to whom much is given, much is required. I might be the apprentice teacher, but I need that journeyman, and I need that master teacher to hook into what I need to do. I might be the master teacher, but I still need the other two. So try to collaborate on your campuses with the different levels of teachers that you have in order to grow, to produce the students that we need in the 21st century and beyond.
Well, you heard it first. Well, this was another episode of The Impact of Educational Leadership, episode 19. I'm your host, ID3, along with Professor Jeff Willie. Tonight's special panelists were Rick Beaule and Bryan. Good night.
Welcome to the Impact of Educational Leadership Talk Show podcast, hosted by ID3 and Professor Jeff Willie. This show is designed to provide an exclusive forum on educational achievement gaps related to learner success while discovering relationships and family issues in diverse settings.